Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this week's episode of Pilot Light, a podcast where we watch the first episode of Summit and then we talk about it. My name's David, and boy, was I myth taken. This holds up pretty well.
My name's Sam, and fuck yeah, we're doing Spider-Man, yes!
And I'm Joe, and you wouldn't find Fantastic Four in the sewer.
You might. Have you seen the thing?
You might see the Fantastic Four in Arrested Development in the sewer.
That's true.
Yeah.
Sam, yeah, demerits for your bit. It wasn't funny. This week,
no, I'm just excited. I'm not trying to be funny.
I'm talking over and moving on. This week, we watched the 1994 premiere of Spider-Man, the animated series. The episode, which the title I haven't got in front of me, is about Doc Connors being the Lizard.
Night of the Lizard or something like that.
Night of the Lizard. That it does indeed tally with the information I was given.
Mm-hmm.
I did not Googling. How good am I?
Yeah, so we teased this out last week, and I think I said some disparaging things about this series, and I want to apologise on 2 counts, Your Honour. The first is that they have now ordered this into the 5 seasons it aired in on Disney Plus. Whereas I do promise when Disney Plus first launched in the UK, this was just 65 episodes in one, like season 1 block.
Yeah.
But they fixed that. And number 2, this was actually pretty fun. This was a decently animated, pretty fun episode. I wouldn't say it's the best episode.
Right,
of this
I'm going to
series.
stop you now. This is a disgusting level of unenthusiasm about this TV show. This is one of the greatest cartoons ever made by all of humanity. Right? Let's just put it out there.
Your Honour, the plaintiff is obviously confused and deranged. I think this is great. A fine cartoon that holds a high place in my childhood nostalgia, which I enjoy even now. It may even be the best superhero cartoon.
So however, what else is there? What other measure of culture have we got other than superhero media? This is where we're at.
The Simpsons.
Okay, I'll give you The Simpsons, but I am going to suggest I'm going to say that this is a really, really good TV show that holds up incredibly well. So much so that I've actually been watching it, like just as a grown up, because it's entertaining and there's enough to keep you going. Like, this is great. I love this, and also I will admit, heavy nostalgia drug we've got going on here.
I would also say that like The Simpsons and Futurama are completely like they aren't in the same class as this, because this is obviously aimed at a much younger audience than Simpsons and Futurama.
I have a rebuttal to the Honourable Mr. Sellers. I think while really good, is not quite as good as Batman the Animated Series. I just want to throw that out there. I think that's a better cartoon. Oh, there's not much in it though.
There's not much in it. So in this, I mean, you know what, Spider-Man, but a young man with spider-like abilities fights crime as a superhero in New York City while trying to have a normal personal life. And I think.
And guess what? There's no origin story. Oh my God, there's no origin story.
No, there is later on. There is later on, but not as a first episode. We get to just jump in and enjoy Spider-Man for its. For its best. The best features of Spider-Man is what we get in this episode, and most of the episodes that follow it. Like, it's all top quality. So this is 1994. This is a Saturday morning 90s TV show, which we've spoken about before. With Pinky and the Brain, which we did recently.
Brain.
Yeah, which is another good show. But really, it's that coming on, after your early morning TV crap, which is for the young kids. So this is like, it's 8:30. We're getting towards the point where your parents are going to turn it off, and just before they do, you're going to watch a bit of Spider-Man, and it's going to be brilliant. Like, this is.
And let's talk about how you know it's coming on, Sam. Is you get that opening theme music. Like, this opening theme music is notorious.
Inject this into my veins. Into my spider blood, radioactive spider blood infused veins.
Absolutely, man. It's Cynthia's. I mean, if you're listening to the podcast version of this episode, you've already heard the opening theme as we came into the episode, and my fucking lord, is that not the cokiest, synthiest thing you've ever heard? Like, kids, what do kids love? Oh yeah, ecstasy and partying. Great, fantastic. I've got just the thing.
And I think it is. We've talked about opening themes before as well, whereas as being like They're so important to kids TV because they've got to give you the premise, they've got to attract you, and they've got to get you through the next 20, 30 seconds to be like, oh, I'm invested in this as a child. And I think this is perfect. I think this is about as good as it gets for like 90s TV themes. I don't see there's anything better than this in terms of summing up what the show is about and just getting you pumped. Like, I'm ready to go. I am ready to go after this.
I think I described it as both the best and the worst intro ever.
I don't know if I want to comment on the quality of it. It's certainly one of the most memorable.
Oh, you know what's coming? Magic is it sings about spider blood, radioactive spider blood.
Also performed. So it's written by Shuki Levy, who did most of the music for this show, but Joe Perry, the Aerosmith guitarist, for some reason. But it does mean that we get these wonderful escalating guitar solos. Like it's that bit which they do once, and you think that's cool, and then a few moments later they do again even more like drug fueled guitar solo, which is wonderful.
It's a lot. So good. It's good. But let's not go long on opening intros. But like it's like you said, it's one of those things where as a kid, like Saturday morning cartoons is like a 3 or 4 hour block of parents can leave the kids just in front of the TV. But you'd wander off and you do this and the other. But if you're in the kitchen getting a sandwich or whatever, and you hear this come on, you're like, oh, Spider-Man's on. Like it's very much a
yeah. And
Pavlovian response.
If I remember rightly,
glued to the screen.
Yeah, it was on ITV, I think. And I think it was later on in the morning when we were kids.
Because like you said, the early morning is like Teletubbies and shit like that.
Yeah,
it's time. It's time for the parents to kind of have the cup of coffee and wake up, prepare for the day.
I don't know, man. I feel like
something on.
I feel like I'd be concerned about this cartoon if I listened to the intro. I'd be like, what is this? Then again, it was the 90s and cartoons were giving kids seizures and parents didn't give a fuck about that. So why would they care about this?
I seizures. Kids pay attention to the words in there, really. They don't really
think everyone was just so burnt out on the economic prosperity that they didn't have time to raise children properly, which is totally understandable.
We're all watching films about like Office Space where we were just so tired of these well-paid jobs that just satisfy. Oh, it's just so
well-paid, secure jobs with decent benefits. Yeah,
God damn it.
God.
Anyway. So this show, this comes from Fox Kids, and like Marvel is involved, but this is a rough time for Marvel. Marvel is on the floor. It's
the low point for Marvel, isn't it?
Scraps.
Which is hard to understand nowadays because obviously Marvel is like, especially since it's the Disney acquisition. Because again, Disney owns everything. We love Disney. Pay us. You can own us too. Like
surprisingly cheap. Surprisingly cheap.
Not surprisingly, perfectly reasonably
cheap, but also like we can't be embarrassed. There has to be some exchange of money here. Anyway, neither here nor there.
We're not
Marvel
giving ourselves
now,
away for free. That's what we're saying.
Pennies,
exactly.
Pennies.
No, it's not like some sort of street corner hooker. Marvel at the minute is this all-encompassing giant, and obviously, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is this tour de force of like. Especially with the new TV shows that have come out, and like you've been punched in the face every fucking which way from Sunday by Marvel these days. However, in the 90s, Marvel, you've got X-Men, you've got Spider-Man. That is it. That is maybe Superman, but like
Superman's DC. No,
Marvel, and you've got Spider-Man, and you've got the X-Men, and you've got nothing else anyone cares about. The X-Men films are a few years off yet. The Spider-Man films are about 10 years away. Mm-hmm. I think around 94, 95 is when Marvel Comics had to be saved from the brink of bankruptcy, I believe.
Yeah.
This is like the real like low point where, obviously it was really all or nothing sort of moment, which makes it interesting, especially in that I think this is the beginnings of, someone might tell me better, of when Fox got the rights to Spider-Man and obviously as the biggest property.
Mm-hmm. So in 96, they had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is kind of like a pre-thing where like we're in shit, but we can maybe save it. But they managed to pay back some of their creditors, and then merged with Toy Biz. And this is after Spider-Man has gone out, which again it kind of shows you that this did well, it was successful. However, it wasn't enough to save the company. Toy Biz, however, were quite invested in this as well. I think they were kind of like a co-production deal, and so the executive producer of this show was Avi Arad, who was the CEO of Toy Biz. Now, that's important because it kind of sets up where the conception of this show came from, which, because it's the 90s, it's about selling toys. Everyone is trying to chase that He-Man dollar. God damn us. Like, we are going to go hard on making toys out of everything.
Does anyone else have, like, because we were kids in the 90s, does anyone else have any really, really cool 90s toys? And I want to touch on this every time we talk about a 90s property.
Well, last time you brought up Street Sharks, and that
No. Oh, go on.
Well, that I hadn't thought about Street Sharks in decades, and now here I am, just Googling Street Sharks, getting into the lore. Every single episode, like, oh, where do I watch this? And that is one of the ones that I think is like, I remember had the you push down the fin and the jaw opened. It was amazing.
Cool. The ones that do things.
Most
great.
of my toys were like the free ones out of cereal boxes. that was kind of my level of toy. Yeah, didn't have anything cool like that.
Don't worry, guys. Joe owns a house now, so he's doing fine.
I mean, I have a mortgage. I don't literally own it, unfortunately.
I mean, basically, I had a biker one of the biker mice from Mars, like dolls. Like, it wasn't a proper doll; it was all plastic, and it had the antennas, and it was the grey one with one eye. And I can't remember his name. And there were 3 of them, and I only ever had the one of them, and I just used to carry it around with me as a small child everywhere. And I think that's one of the harder toys to explain what the fuck it is. Like, it's a mouse with antenna.
Harley Davidson riding mice. From
we couldn't afford Harley Davidson, Sam.
Yeah,
we couldn't afford the accessories.
Yeah, but so this was the idea. We can make some Spider-Man cartoons and we can sell toys and everyone's happy. And then here comes a guy called John Semper, who actually had like a bit of a creative vision for this show and was able to kind of to mold it into what we see on screen, which is probably the best depiction of Spider-Man in anything, maybe other than Spider-Verse. I think this is the best show that I've seen, or TV, or movie that I've seen, that really like just gets the characterization of Peter Parker. It follows the stories from the comic books really faithfully, and I think a lot of it comes from his kind of creative vision. And then, as we'll maybe get into, the kind of battle he had with Avi Arad about trying to keep sell toys by making a good TV show, which I think is pretty cool.
Well, let's talk about the episode itself, maybe in a bit more detail, because obviously, like, the reason for me that Spider-Man the animated series is really good is, like, it's very much ripped from the comic books, where rather than having 10 boring episodes about how he's struggling to deliver pizzas, we get a lot of what every episode. It's a Spider-Man Rogues Gallery baddie. So in this episode, we have Doc Connors as the Lizard. Obviously, we're all, obviously nerds, we're familiar with that. He, in films, just to tie this into the films, the James Garfield ones, like, he's in that. The first one of those, I think, is like, he's also the baddie in that. Doc Connors as the Lizard. Mm-hmm. Which is an odd choice, but that's just how many Spider-Man iterations we've had.
Yeah, lots of Spider-Man. This episode then is based off a 1963 comic called Face to Face ellipsis with the Lizard. I added my own vocal performance to that. It's a really
great.
Thank you. It's a good episode, and it goes to one of the better characters in Spider-Man lore, which I think is Doc Connors, who turns into this freakish lizard, oddly with a coat that also grows to his size and then shrinks again, which I never understood.
Don't question it.
Also,
Taylor,
here's just a thing, right? And speaking of Taylor, like, doesn't Doc Connors only have one arm when he's a human? So,
Yes.
like, why would he have a lab coat with 2 arms for when he's a lizard?
I think it is rolled
Because
up.
it's because that's why he like turned into a lizard, wasn't it? He
But why would you
like,
get a
injected
lab
himself to
coat?
give himself a second arm, and that's his second arm turned into a lizard. That's how like
no,
it happened.
I get that, but like, it's surely if you've got 1 arm, all your lab coats have just got 1 arm. Surely that's like a sensible way to do business. I don't know. I don't have 1 arm or a lab coat
They don't make one-armed lab coats actually.
yet.
Welcome to Lab Coat Cast.
And I'm not sure that that's a very like big kind of like you know audience to kind of
Possibly not.
Fair
make
enough.
profit.
What the start of this episode then is we get to see a little bit of a bit between 2 TV repairmen. There's a funny joke. They're
They're like subway guys. Sam.
They work down in the sewer, so I don't think they're repairing TVs. Sam.
I think they're like railway workers.
Sorry, yeah, but they're going down to fix. They're going down to fix some cabling or something, aren't they? And there's a joke where he's where one of them says, "Oh, I used to be a TV executive," like as if he's now been lowered to crawling down into sewers, which is kind of a funny. It's kind of a
I
funny.
think the joke is like, therefore he's only qualified to crawl in sewers.
Yeah. Now I'm happy to take the piss out of TV execs, absolutely, but let's maybe like people who are going down and doing essential maintenance on sewers seems like a pretty important job. But this show is kind of has a few of those like more adulty fourth wall references. There's one in a couple episodes time where J. Jonah Jameson is like saying to Brock, you completely embarrassed me in front of all of the networks, even Fox," which is like a Simpsons-esque roast.
Simpsons are Futurama-esque, like they're on Fox, but they're making fun of Fox. But you don't expect it from a kids' TV show.
No, because everyone's like, kids are like, "What the hell's Fox? I don't know what Fox is." So that's the opening bit, and this is where I think for me, I noticed the first thing I noticed was when the former TV executive, now sewer maintenance guy, is being chased by the lizard, and he's driving away, running off, and then Spider-Man's like, "What are you doing? Slow down!" Like this is where the animation starts to really show for me, because it's a very weird style of animation. This it feels kind of like your standard 90s stuff. It's very different to X-Men though. It's very different to the Batman one. It kind of verges on some of the Lupin stuff. Remember that film, previous episode?
I do.
Watched
Castle Cagliostro.
Yeah. Turns out done by the same animation studio in Korea, I think. So there's lots of that kind of feel there. But it's a weird thing, isn't it? And then we get these digital inserts as well. It's quite unique.
The digital inserts are not good. I only really picked up on 2 or 3 of them, and it's early on when there's the car chase scene, and it's like, oh god, just animate it. I know it costs more, but please.
I think they were hoping to use more of the digital stuff, but it ended up being too expensive because it's the 90s. Whereas now, what, you want us to get people to manually draw it by hand? What are we, billionaires? We can't do that. Just get it done, digitally, and be done with it.
Yep. So once they kind of have this chase out of the way, he basically saves he saves one of the TV repairmen. One of them gets captured by the lizard, and the other one kind of flees in a panic and nearly kills hundreds of people. Crashes into the river. Spidey saves him, and he tells him about some red eyes, which the lizard has red eyes apparently. Well, he does have red eyes. So, and Spidey's like, "What are you talking about, red eyes? Who has red eyes?" And it's it then kind of goes into a little bit more kind of into Peter's kind of like personal life, doesn't it? So his boss is asking him to get a picture of the lizard if he can. And he gets the first person to get a good clear shot is I think it's £1,000 or something like that,
which he can use to buy his aunt out of debtor's prison or whatever's going on in the background of this episode. Like, this is the one thing about Spider-Man that I just could do without, is I cannot stand how poor Aunt May is and how consistently poor she is, and how consistently she lives in a really nice house yet is constantly on the line of literally being thrown in prison for poverty.
She's probably one of the most depressing Aunt Mays in Spider-Man.
I don't mind this.
It's a good Aunt May performance, but it's a particularly like old and like doddery and vulnerable sort of Aunt May.
Yeah.
I remember some of the later seasons as well. Like I thought she died, and I'm not sure she doesn't, to be fair. But she certainly goes through the mill a couple of times.
I think this works well though, because it's core to Peter Parker's character, isn't it? Like I think this is such a good characterization of.
I don't know, man. I'm sold on sexy Marissa Tomei as Aunt May. I feel like that's just an improvement across the board.
No, that doesn't work. Because what's like, I think the draw to Spider-Man is that he's a kid who has like the personal life thing, and then on the side he's trying to be a superhero. That's always what's been so engaging in a way that Batman's cool. I can't really relate to being a billionaire though. Like I don't really have the same connection as I do to like being an awkward kid who's trying to pass his exams and whatever else. So, and then when you combine it in this with the great performance by what's the guy's name? I haven't got it there. You look it up.
Look it up. But it's interesting that they age up. They age up Peter Parker in this. I say age up. It's hard to know like where in the comics we are, but
Christopher Daniel Barnes is
Christopher Daniel Barnes, very good. They age him up. So from this episode into the Spider-Man series, he's an adult. He's at college. So like they kind of move away from him being 15 or 16 years old, which I think allows them to do like a lot more not adult storylines, because this is very toned down to be suitable for children. Not in a bad way, but like it allows them to have him have a lot more agency than a teenager would, and there's no storylines about like, oh, I've got to get back before curfew, because he's a grown man. He's built like a linebacker in the drawing.
Yeah, he does. He looks
as well.
Bigger than Spider-Man.
Something to mention here as well is the narration. Actually, you don't really notice it. Like a lot of shows when they have narration, it's quite easy to pick up on, but it takes a while to actually realise that that's what he's doing, and it works really, really well for me. He does a really good job of narrating it. It's
again like ripped from the comic books, where Spider-Man does talk to himself a lot, and it's kind of like, and we've seen so many iterations. Spider-Man, it seems like one of the most overdone properties. We've got this series, 4 or 5 other cartoons. We've got the Tobey Maguire films. We've got the James Garfield films. Now we've got that other guy who's doing movies. And like, so we've seen this a lot, but this is kind of like the best of both worlds. It's taking all the good stuff from the comics, but it's not like totally irreverent. Like in this episode, it doesn't assume that you know who Doc Connors is. It tells you who he is. It tells you how Peter knows him. It tells you what happened in 20 minutes.
And it's doing that because it's kids' TV, isn't it? And it has to like reach a level where you can kind of just tune into this as a 8-year-old or whatever. My son watches this and he thinks it's brilliant. He always enjoys it because it is.
And he's right.
Yeah, because he's an articulate fella. It works at that level. But this Peter Parker, I think it's my favourite Peter Parker. Especially when you get on to fucking Tobey Maguire levels, which is stop. Look at that face crying. Stop it.
Look at that face. Oh God, the face.
You know the face I'm talking about. You know that face. I do think though that the narration in this is like it's pretty heavy-handed, and again,
it's just taking it from the comics, where like for a very good reason in the comics, he's talking to himself, because otherwise it's just a panel of Spider-Man doing things most of the time.
Yeah.
So like he's talking to himself to like have, do you know what I mean? Have a dialogue going on, and in this. It just allows them to like, number one, as I said, those animators must have been like, oh my God, it's a scene. Spider-Man's talking to himself again. Yay! Because they don't have to animate a mouth. They don't have to look at lines. Like they can fucking dub whatever they like on this. That's fine.
Also cheaper on the cast because there's one person that has a lot of lines. The rest of them, nothing.
Yeah, but it means I think it is a bit exposition-y. Like it's sometimes you're like, wow, there's no one else here. Who am I talking to? You know what I mean?
He's just telling loads of jokes to himself. The one that Dave used and the one I used and stuff. It's just him talking to himself.
It's a bit fourth wall-y, like not quite, because he's not talking to us. He is talking to himself, but do you know what I mean? It's kind of on the edge there.
But it also yeah, that fourth wall thing's interesting because he's saying like, oh, you don't, as you said, you don't see the Avengers in the sewer and all these other things. Like why can't I be one of those galaxy hopping superheroes as opposed to the guy who's fighting a lizard in a sewer? Great. I think the legacy of this though is that you see quite a lot of that of this tone, this feel, this kind of light, funny, like positive attitude that Peter Parker has. You see it in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies as well, where there's like bits later on where it's like, who am I? I'm your everyday hero. It's fucking shite.
They always have to have like the little like quips and things when they're fighting bad guys, like when they're like, he does that in this, but in all the the more modern ones, it's always Iron Man kind of making funny quips as he's fighting somebody. And
again, it's that difference between, like, from a writing point of view, in this episode, it'd be an example we have to use. Like, he's in the sewer, he's looking around, he goes, oh, there's nothing here, it's all right. And then he goes, hold on. And he finds something, he goes, looks like I was myth-taken. But, like, that's a line that Peter Parker says to himself because he thinks it's funny. It's not do you know what I mean? From a writing perspective, that's not something that he says because the writers thought the audience would find it funny. It's something that he says to himself because in the Peter Parker's character would talk to himself and would think that was funny.
Yeah.
And the fact that we find it funny is kind of gravy, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Whereas modern, on the latter stuff, the Tobey Maguire stuff, it's very much more like he's saying a quippy line because the audience will react. Do you know what I mean? It's to the audience rather than...
He kind of does that in this as well, though. There's like because when he's fighting the lizard thing, he's there like saying stuff like, "Oh, good reactions for a future handbag" and stuff like that.
That's comedy gold, Joe. You know it. I know that's comedy. The only thing I'd like from this Peter Parker is I love it when and kind of Superman does this maybe a bit better, is when the alter ego, the mild mannered alter ego, is a total wimp and completely useless. And I love how I wish there's a little bit more of that, because in this
I don't know, man. There's a bit where he basically assaults Betsy, and she's like, she gets over that very quickly. If you were walking down a corridor with somebody that you kind of knew from school, right, you suddenly grab her by the mouth and the neck, like, there's no way you're talking your way out of that situation.
I don't remember this bit. What happened?
So they're walking down. He goes to the lab to see Doc Connors, or to get him to look at something. And I think it's Betsy, the blonde-haired lady, is with him.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Betsy Brandt, for the character from the comic books. And they're walking down the corridor, and the Spidey senses go. And he grabs her, but like he covers her mouth so she won't scream, so that if there is someone, they won't know they're there. But she's like, what the fuck are you doing? You're covering my mouth. What's happening here? And then in the next scene, it's all fine. But I'd be like, wow, the police are getting called. Like, you just...
I think it's Deborah Whitman that you're talking about.
Deborah Whitman.
Yeah, played by Liz Georges. Yeah, so okay, that is a bit questionable, but it's the 90s.
No, so what I'm saying is, like, there's not a delineating line. Like, we don't really get a lot. We don't know who the Peter Parker character is in this. Mm-hmm. We know who the Spider-Man character is, but we don't know who the alter ego is really. And it's kind of like because again, he's not drawn to be like a dweeby, like, and maybe that's just the animation, but he looks, the man looks like Tom Brady, basically, like wide shoulders, yeah, 6'8" tall.
So in this episode, then there's kind of lots going on, but effectively we're now onto the lizard. We're talking about the lizard's free, and nobody really knows what's going on, but they do know that it's eventually that it's Doc Connors. I think the lizard is one of my favorite villains. I had this character, which was awesome. I remember this toy. I had this toy. I think it's one of my favorite villains because it's like such a cool, like, human story. This guy's lost his arm. He's a scientist, and he's basically wants to create like a serum or whatever that can grow an arm back, or can help other people who might have, had
grow limbs.
Yeah, whatever else. So
grow me a third arm to drink a beer while I drive.
Yeah, I could do anything. Yeah, that's what you use your third arm for, Dave. Sure. So
I think I'd need an upgrade on a certain other appendage to get 3 hands on it, Sam.
Oh, we can
Speak
do
for
it.
yourself.
That's
You
possible
will
as
turn
well,
in-
Dave.
You will turn into a lizard, unfortunately, but it's a side effect you might be willing to
Price to
accept.
pay, you know.
Yeah. But what we see though is Doc Connors and his like tragic story where he's got a wife and a kid. Like there's points where it gets pretty close to the bone, I think, in terms of being like quite traumatic. You know, when little Billy, literally the kid's name, is like, "Daddy, no," you know, and then he takes his mom away, and there's a great point when Spider-Man's like, says, "Don't worry, I'll get him. Now, I'm just going to take you to a neighbour's house," which is, of course, because it's Saturday morning TV. You can't just leave a kid there. Everyone's going to be like, "You leaving the kid?" So they take him. But I think it's such a great character. I think it's a great starting point for this TV show. I think.
Yeah, and I do agree. I like Doc Connors as a character. I'm not a huge fan of the mad scientist serum. I'm gonna save humanity like arc.
I like that.
I think
Don't
that
question it.
do you know what it is? I think we've seen too much of it in movies, and it's nice in this because it's not like a 2 hour like tragic screaming at the moon thing for him. It's just quite a short, like we understand what's happening. We get a great techno babble. It's the neogenic recombinator, which is
Yeah, I was reading about this. They don't actually, and this is what's so stupid about the actual intro. So in the actual show Spider-Man, they don't talk about a radioactive spider. It's neogenics. So the word radioactive is in the theme tune, the radioactive spider blood. In the actual TV show, it's neogenics.
Oh,
They don't mention
so
radioactivity.
I'm gonna. So I hope someone got fired for that blunder.
everyone got fired, Sam. This show got cancelled after 5 seasons.
Oh, yeah,
Everyone
we'll come
got
to
fired.
But the other thing, and this is the first kind of like season of this, I guess, is based on it continues with the lizard stuff. So Doc Connors, and it's kind of like the major story arc through the whole season. Now that's interesting because how many TV shows, Saturday morning TV shows, can you think of that had significant like long-term arcs? Because I can't think of many, especially not as detailed as this one, where you've got.
I would say that I think most Saturday morning cartoons like this. So I'm going to say Street Sharks as an example. I'm going to say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as an example. I'm going to say Biker Mice from Mars as an example. Like most of the episodes are Monster of the Week. It's like which baddie are we fighting this week? However, there's usually like an overarching thing. In Street Sharks, there's like the evil professor, like I said, with his serum and his saving the world or whatever. And they're basically like every monster they fight week by week, it originates from him. So there's kind of like a thread there every single week. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is usually like Shredder's not the evil one; it's the other guy. It's usually the same like evil guys pulling the strings for everything. And in Spider-Man, it's kind of like usually one villain or like there's a couple. There's a good recurring. Actually, there's a really cool recurring Blade plot in this because that's right, movie fans. Blade is a recurring character in Spider-Man the Animated Series.
Ultra-violent vampire killer.
That's
Kids
right,
TV.
guys. Right, guys. In this Spider-Man universe, the world is fucking full of vampires, and we never ever hear about it except when we do.
I love that arc. But what I think it comes down to is John Semper. So this is the producer. This is the main creative force behind the show because he was determined to have these arcs in there, and I think that when you see the butting heads against the Toy Biz guy, who's like, I don't care about arcs, and they were actually quite nervous, I think, because kids can't follow things. Kids are stupid. Just sell the toys. This is one big toy commercial, is what Avi Arad said. So, like, to get arcs like this, I think is really impressive because I can't think of many other shows. Yeah, you're right. There's like a common theme perhaps running through them, but to have basically entirely separate, different stories, like fucking Star Trek doesn't do that.
But it can be confusing though. And a good example, a good thing to compare this to is the X-Men animated series, which has this kind of like, honestly, incredibly confusing like time travel-y, future pasty storyline involving these big robot things that they're always fighting. And as a 30-year-old man, I'm still not totally clear, and I've watched quite a lot of it again. But as a kid, I found it like fascinating, and I really wanted all the toys and things. But like totally, like I don't know what's happening, but I'm on board. I want more of it. What? But oh my god, great! Which I think that maybe Spider-Man doesn't suffer from to the same extent, but like there is a certain amount of that as a kid. Like it doesn't matter if you're entertained. Like actually, as far as something making sense goes, that's less important.
Yeah.
Kids have a good imagination.
Yeah,
kids have a good imagination. They'll connect the dots.
Yeah, and I think these episodes are standalone enough. I think that's the balance that they managed to strike. Is that like this episode ends with Doc Connors opening the door with a shit-eating grin on his face because I'm fine now. What are you talking about? Because like that's resolved. Like the arc of the episode that Billy's scared of his dad now because he's turned into a lizard.
Because he's a horrible lizard that kidnaps people. Yeah.
Oh god, like it's fine. And then I think it comes back later on that he hasn't resolved it. He's still continuing to experiment with his research on this stuff. So I think it's a great balance. I think it works really well, and we get to have these great, satisfying long-term story arcs. Which reminds me of there's a Ninjago, which I think we've talked about before, but which my son watches. That has a similar thing where you've got an individual episode, but there's this thread that runs throughout, which actually makes it quite compelling. Like as an adult, it's quite compelling, and I think that's maybe why I can still watch Spider-Man now, because you get a bit of substance. It's not just Monster of the Week, which can be a bit.
It is quite. Difficult. There is quite a lot of Monster of the Week, I should say. Like it's not.
Oh, yeah.
You are right, Sam. There is more of a thread, but at the same time, it's which villain is Spider-Man fighting this week? Like there's nothing wrong with that. But I don't want to make out that this is like a cogent, linear plot moving into plot series, because it isn't quite. It's a bit of both, Sam.
And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be for Saturday morning TV, should it?
The other thing with this episode, actually, I was just going to say, they apparently they released this episode months before any of the other season 1 episodes as a special sneak preview, and it was such a hit. They actually considered upping the amount of episodes that they ordered. So they ordered 65. They were going to actually order 100 based off how popular it was. But
there was there were episodes written for season 6.
Yes.
Sorry, my brain just wouldn't fire there. So this got 5 seasons and then got cancelled. But not for a lot of the reasons that a lot of the other shows that we do get cancelled. This got cancelled, as we kind of alluded to here, because there was friction between, I think, the showrunners and the Fox executive and Arad, who was the guy who owned the property. And I think there was basically like well, fuck you, I'm cancelling it just out of like spite, because this was a good money maker. It was popular. Critics liked it. Like there was, they were writing episodes for season 6. The scripts are out there. And they were just like, nope, you're done. Get out. You're all fired.
Replaced it with Spider-Man Unlimited.
That came a few years later, Joe.
It was 1999 that came out.
Oh, so not long after them.
Which I think is is all right, and did well as well. So it comes down to Avi Arad, the toy guy, and then I think head of Fox Kids, Margaret Loesch, who these two personally didn't get on, and I basically think Margaret Loesch, who then left Fox Kids just a couple of years afterwards, she basically, like almost in a kind of like a personal attack, because this was his baby in terms of he managed to, make loads of money off toys, and then he cancelled it because he didn't like him, which is really sad, because if there was additional episodes, as you say, like, and it sounds like they were pretty well formed, that we'd really. It's more good TV that could have been made if not for these.
It doesn't always work. Look at the animated series of Star Trek, Sam.
That was bad from episode 1, Joe.
I will not look at it.
They were based on episodes of the original series, not like from other episodes.
That's true. That's true.
Animated. So,
but I would say that, like, yes, it's sad, and not sad, but it's it's a shame. But at the same time, there are 65 episodes of this, and like, if you want to watch a Spider-Man thing, like, don't worry about it. Like, we've got you covered. You know,
Also,
I didn't say
Also-
good Spider-Man thing. There's lots of bad Spider-Man things, but I think that in terms of a superhero, I think we're quite well served by like the Spider-Verse film is excellent. Like a really captures the soul of this TV show. That film, I think, in terms of
also
like
in terms
the
of
light and the fun.
kids, in terms of kids as well, like they have an extraordinary capacity to like rewatch something. So 65 episodes, put the first one back on again. They're not going to know. They're not going to care. They'll watch it all again.
Christ, Joe, 10 episodes, and they'll be straight back round, and you're like, fucking hell,
Yes.
I can't watch Ben on Holiday again. Please kill me. Please send help. It's awful. Absolutely awful.
Reason 175 not to have children. Don't make you watch fucking TV. You don't want to.
There's some famous voices that we hear in this. We get the second best J. Jonah Jameson performance.
Joey Jojo Jr. Shabadoo, yes.
Yeah, is obviously behind J.K. Simmons in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Edward
and the new ones.
Asner. Say again.
And the new ones. He's in the new ones as well. The new Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man films have got him in as J.K. Simmons.
Homecoming and the likes, yes.
Edward Asner, obviously, famous guy who's I don't know if he's still alive. Is Edward Asner still alive? It's possible.
I think he died in 2011 or 12. I think he went by Ed. To be fair, Sam, Ed Asner, I think
he's still alive. Very much still alive. And
well, I think I'm due some sort of restitution from some contractors, so I'll chase that up.
You know him from he's the voice in Up, so again a good voice actor, someone who knows how to do voice acting, which I think works really well. I just love Jameson as a character. I think he's so funny, and then when you add the J.K. Simmons stuff later on, this is just comedy gold. I imagine that I imagine J.K. Simmons must have been inspired, or at least seen.
There's a lot in common, isn't there, with
even the
inflections and the energy. There's also Hank Azaria doing his a variant of his patented Bronson voice. It really is Brock in this is voiced by Hank Azaria, and he really does sound like the Bronson guy from The Simpsons. I couldn't get over it.
I can't hear Hank Azaria anywhere without just thinking of this, especially the generic background characters that he does. Thanks, buddy, and all these small lines. It just sounds exactly like that. But I think he's a good actor. It's nice to hear him not doing an offensive accent. That's what I enjoyed from this.
Yes,
no more.
It's always positive for him not to be demeaning an entire nationality. Yes.
Yeah. And that's
it's a fun
it.
show. I like some of the voice acting going forwards. I haven't got the names of anyone in front of me because it wasn't the episode we watched. And this is like a smaller cast. We obviously don't get Mary Jane until a little bit later on. We don't get some of the more, common Spider-Man villains. We get Norman Osborn and everything later on. And again, really competent voice performances. I guess in my mind, the mid-90s is kind of like the peak of hand-drawn animation and voice acting, where they met in this wonderful, The Simpsons being the sort of the peak example of that, and then Futurama following it, and it kind of tapers off. Now everything's digital. Nothing looks like it has depth. Everything's very flat, and there's too many fucking actors in my animation. Go and get a job, man. You were good looking enough to become an actor. Go and get a job.
Leave the voice acting to the voice actors. So the kind of last bit of this episode is they just have a big fight, don't they? There's some great animation. The bit when they're fighting in the water over the transformer laser thingy, you can't really see them. It's kind of outlined, silhouetted almost. And then when he fires, when they fire the laser, this is there's a frame of it that I genuinely think is wonderful, that you could just cut out and have as a picture. It's amazing. It's really nice. And
you get the happy ending, don't you? With managing to turn Doc back in.
Yeah.
Now.
And Peter Parker gets his $1,000 photo. That's the kind of
and
the
Brock gets hung by spiderweb off a lamppost. So everyone's happy.
Poor Brock. He's just trying to do his job, man.
Don't worry, he'll be Venom soon. It's all good. It's all good. He'll be the Dark Spider-Man. It's very, very
That's
exciting.
true. Who played Venom in that Spider-Man 3? It's the main guy. Someone find his name for me. It's the main guy from that 70s show. The kid from that, and he is the
Him.
worst version of Venom you could possibly imagine.
I don't
know
know.
who
Keep
you
talking,
mean.
and I'll find him.
Yes, we'll keep talking. Yeah, Spider-Man 3 is an abortion of a film, which we should absolutely do on the main feed because
Topher Grace. Is that
Topher
him?
Grace. Yeah, Topher Grace, because I think Spider-Man 3 is possibly one of the worst movies ever made, let alone like a superhero movie, let alone a Spider-Man movie, and there's a lot of bad Spider-Man movies.
I quite liked. I like the first one, the first Sam Raimi movie. The second one with Doc Ock is like, it's okay, and then it's just amazing how quickly the last one drops off a cliff. Like,
What's clever about that third one, Sam, is how some movies they have an interesting premise and they miss the mark, and some movies, they have some odd casting that doesn't quite do the job, and some movies have bad digital effects, and some movies have really odd tonal things like Tobey Maguire putting black mascara on, putting loads of grease in his hair and doing karaoke and dancing. And then some movies, like Spider-Man 3, they offend on all fronts. And it's like they went out of their way to make the worst possible version of that script that they could.
I mean, if you're going to like make a mess of it, you might as well do it in style, Dave.
Well, they were clever, Joe, because what they'd done 2 movies ago was cast Tobey Maguire, so it was all baked in. They were ready. They were ready to make a really terrible Spider-Man movie.
he's not
40-year-old Tobey Maguire trying to be a student.
The trouble is, Joe, when you ask Tobey Maguire, who's 45 years old when he made that movie, to play an adult, that's when it somehow falls apart.
I mean, I'm not suggesting he did a great job, but as a teenager either, to be honest.
But somehow he's better at that than portraying an adult.
Yeah, but I have to say, I still think it's a fun, it's a good origin story. Like it's enough there, which I think works. But this is a conversation for a different time. To finish off, I'd like to talk about again the legacy of this show, because I think so much of the interest in Spider-Man. I can't really say this with certainty, but I think a heck of a lot of it comes from the fact that we watched this when we were kids, and then the people who are making the decisions obviously are now in our age bracket. Spider-Man is one of those properties that I think has just managed to just continue and persist in a way that doesn't seem to have made sense. Superman has come and gone and then come again, and then we're not really sure what's going to happen next.
God,
the Avengers have obviously just risen to a huge ascendancy. Spider-Man not there only because Fox held the rights to that. Otherwise, you fucking better believe he would be slapped on the front of the first Avengers movie if they could. And I think a lot of it comes back to TV like this, where you've got a really, really good idea of what Spider-Man should be, and that's the success of it. This is the best conception, the best bringing together of all the different threads that make good Spider-Man stories, and then from there we probably culminate in one of the best movies I think I've seen in a long, long time, which is Into the Spider-Verse, which just nails the theme and the tone of what Spider-Man should be. And I think it's built on this show.
Yeah. And you are right, Sam. I would say that probably the more realistic, real-world reason for that is that Spider-Man is a really safe, bankable property.
Yeah.
Name a Spider-Man, even Spider-Man 3, which is notorious, made money. Even those James Garfield films, which are bad with a capital B, made loads of money. These... We should do them at some point because they're a real late aughts sort of. It's only been 4 years since the last Spider-Man movie came out, but we're rebooting the franchise with another origin story
because they had to make a film to renew their agreement.
Yeah. But it's like you said. I'm endlessly fascinated by Fox owning Spider-Man, and I think that now that obviously Disney owns everything, again Disney pay us, we maybe might see Spider-Man, because he is in some of those Marvel films and he gets his own sort of standalone movies. We get to see maybe Spider-Man as a character become more integrated again. But personally, I'm with you. I just kind of want the guys who made Into the Spider-Verse to make more stuff. Give me a series with Nick Cage's like noir Spider-Man. I'll watch it. Like, it might not be good, but I'll watch it. I'm kind of there for it. Because tonally, Spider-Man is a fun superhero who deals with some quite serious subject matters. Like any good superhero, deals with quite serious subject matter, but ultimately it's quite funny and quite light and quite brightly coloured and quite entertaining.
And as a first episode of a TV show, I think this manages to do all the things you just described. We get real life stories, we get genuine, quite scary in some points as well, and little Billy's going to lose his dad and all this stuff. It's humans, the human stories.
Dude, you really identified with little Billy, and I
little Billy, God damn it. And yet it's still fun. Yet it's still
there's always a happy ending. Even though there's this stuff happening, it always manages to wrap it up nicely, so that a kid's not going to be like, oh, little Timmy was left without his dad for forever. No, it's just fine.
Yeah, it's an episode of TV. As usual, we once again haven't. In my mind, this isn't really like a pilot, so it's hard to measure it with that stick because again, because of the way animation works, they'd already made 20 of these before this one came out.
But as Joe says, if there was a significant gap between the airing of this and if there was hugely popular, good ratings, all this stuff, then it served its purpose as a pilot, which is to
totally. I just don't maybe think it's got the hallmarks of a pilot where it's not like a network show. It's not trying to, I'm Spider-Man. And this is my city, and we do get that in a lot of Spider-Man stuff, but it's not this. We're just going to jump in, and it's like, this guy's a superhero. We trust you 5-year-olds to understand that, and to oh yeah, it's a superhero. Of course, he's going to save the people, and he's going to fight the bad guys. Great. It kind of relies on you just sort of jumping in and knowing.
Mm-hmm. There's a 3-month gap between the first episode and the second. So the first episode aired on the 19th of November 1994, and the second episode was the 4th of February 1995.
I wonder how much of that was scheduling, as opposed to production. It's hard to know really.
They could have ceased production though. If nobody watched the first one or it was panned, they could have just gone, we'll just release what we've got and then we'll just call it. We'll call it a day there. So. It obviously did enough in terms of it being a nominal pilot episode, even if, as you say, Dave, it's not necessarily a true pilot.
Yes,
but this is great. This is what I love about doing this podcast, is being able to go back and reassess. And gosh,
dude, I watched 45 episodes of this when Disney Plus came out last year, so we don't necessarily need the podcast for it.
Well, it helps though. It helps, and it gets me back into.
Think of the listeners, Dave. Think of the listeners.
I am thinking of the listeners, and in terms of thinking of the listeners, I think we've really, really done a good job going through this. Now, to remind me as much to remind the listeners, what are we doing next week?
Veep.
Ooh, Veep. Veep.
Interesting. Good show, fun. I wonder if this is a genuine pilot that we're going to watch, or if this is going to be
believe it is. I watched quite a lot of Veep last year before, and I think this is much more of a standard pilot. It's a really American show. This is going to be one of those
10 pence each, 30 pence
exactly.
About good.
It's going to be one of these shows where we talk about essentially American politics as from a view of British people who barely understand anything that's happening.
Oh, it's going to be good. I can't wait to share my ill-informed opinions with the whole internet.
Just to remind everyone, you should know by now, obviously you should be able to predict our political opinions on any given topic.
Yes. Not the bad guys, I think, is what we're going to say to that, and we'll tease it there, and you can hear us tirade next week.
Well, we will see you next week, and in the meantime, you watch out for them lizards.
Spider blood.
Radioactive spider blood.
Who doesn't want spider blood?